1, 2, 3. Listen.
Welcome to Real Deal, Real Deal, Real Deal, Real Deal, Real Deal. Joining me today are the happy pair. Welcome to Real Welcome to Real Deal. I am Brian Rose, and we are live here at London Real World headquarters to talk about Lockdown 2.0 in Britain. We are on full lockdown and have been now for over a week, which means nothing is open except for essential services. But that means I can't go to my gym. I can't take my kids to the bookstore. I can't take my kids to the playground. And effectively, this city is shut down. And it's shut down based on bad data. And so yet we see another disproportionate response to this virus. We see a total lack of science-based decision-making, and we see a complete lack of leadership in this country and in the city of London. And I want to talk about this today. I also want to share a concept with you called focus protection. And it means simply this. We protect those that are vulnerable, but we allow everyone else to get back to work, to get back to their lives, so we can have a country that functions, so we can have a future. And that's what I want to talk about today. It's a concept that was brought forth by a panel of doctors. One of them is Dr. Martin Kulldorff, a Harvard medical doctor who I had on the show yesterday, and I'm going to be playing some videos of our discussions that we had. If you want to watch that full episode, you can go to freedomplatform.tv/Kulldorff and watch the whole thing as you wish. But today, I want to talk about some important concepts. And again, we are in a dire situation right now. We can no longer afford any more disproportionate responses, which is locking down the entire country based on only the cases in certain regions or in certain demographics of the population. And I had the economist David Miles on last week, former Bank of England monetary policy member, who also said the same thing. He said, we will not be able to sustain as a country if this goes on longer than 30 days. And I think he was being generous at the 30 days. And the truth is simply this. We should unlock this country now based on the fact that we locked this whole thing down on flawed data. And I want to talk about the Cambridge study and some of the ideas I have as far as solutions. Again, I always tell my team and everybody I meet, anybody can bring a problem. Bring me a solution, and that's what I want to bring to you today, a solution of how we can get out of this lockdown and still protect the vulnerable, but get our economy back, protect our health services, everything. It's actually quite simple. We've got world-class doctors that have proven it through science, and I want to share that with you today. Before we get started, we are live here, and I'm going to be going through all of your comments on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, etc. Let's kick it off, and let me get your answers to some of these questions, and I literally will be reading out your comments here live. First of all, do you think full lockdown in Britain is justified, and why or why not? Second of all, is it worth the economic damage to lock this country down, and why do you think so? Is it worth the mental health damage and that to our younger generation? And finally, do we need better leadership and a new solution? So please leave me your comments wherever you are. I've got them beamed in here to my iPad, and I'll be coming back to you. But before we get started, I just want to say that the response to me announcing my intentions to be your next mayor of London have been absolutely off the charts. And you'll see probably a lot of imagery and videos that we put out there. And here's an image from our website, which is brianformayor.london, that has detailed my Transform London policy plan of attack for 2021. It's got all of my policies where it comes from transport to science to health to education to getting back to work. You can go there. You can also sign up to be a volunteer. All sorts of things are happening there, and we're super excited. So thank you all for the support. Literally this week, I've been stopped by everyone from people on the streets to people in lorries to bus drivers to black taxi cab drivers. Everybody is saying, Brian, we support you. We want you to be our next mayor, and it's just been incredible. So thank you so much. We've got 6 months left to go, and we are also currently in second place, about to take first place for this race. Again, unprecedented in British political history. An independent candidate for London mayor has never, ever placed second, and that's where we are right now. And here's a quick snapshot of Paddy Power, which is the world's biggest bet maker, an odds maker. And we have now pulled even tighter odds this morning and gone from, I think it was originally 100 to 1 to 50 to 1 to 20 to 1 to 8 to 1. Last week it was 6 to 1 on the show. On Saturday it was 5 to 1, and now they're 4 to 1 odds. Still easy money, in my opinion, if you want to place your bets. And we see the conservative candidate going out even wider, and we also see the current incumbent of mayor widening out as well. So this is just incredible support for us, and it's just proof that we are really a contender in this election, and we will be soon moving into first place, and we will be soon moving into City Hall to become your next mayor of London. And we're super excited to really take that spot and take this city to the next level. Again, 9 million citizens in this city that we want to lead. We want to make this a world-class city once again, and we're excited to do it. So thank you for being here. I appreciate your support. I appreciate everyone out there on the streets who's honking their horns and stopping me and giving us our support, and donating to our campaign, sharing our videos, liking our videos, and also offering to volunteer. We appreciate all of you so much, and I'm so excited to take this city to the next level. And before we get started today, I just want to say this. I feel like all of us will be moving into City Hall together, the 9 million citizens of London, but even a lot of you in other cities around the UK that are struggling with these policies. Our friends up in the north, in Liverpool and Manchester, my good friend Nick Wickcombe, who's fought tooth and nail to keep his gym open, which is important for our mental health. And this also goes for people all around the world that are voicing their support, from people in Brazil to people in America to people in Europe to people even in Asia that are saying, Brian, you know, when you win mayor of London, it's going to show the cities that we live in that there are other ways of dealing with this problem than complete lockdown. And I appreciate that support, and that's what we want to do. We want London to be the model for every city going forward into 2021 of how we can get through this crisis and thrive on the back of it. And I'm confident we can, but it needs new leadership. And the truth is that our current crop of politicians, with their supposed two choices of leadership and their vested interests and their lobbyists and their principal aim, which is to get reelected, they no longer have the solutions we need to a new problem. We need someone that can come with a new vision, new ideas, and take London in a new direction. And that's what I plan on doing as your next mayor of London. I couldn't be more excited. I know it's going to be a difficult job. I know it's going to be a difficult time, but I'm confident that together we can make this happen. And I will emphasize together. I'm going to need the help of every single one of the 9 million citizens in this city and a lot of you around the world to do what we need to do in London. But again, I think we can be a model for this entire world, and I'm super excited to do it. So thank you so much. Let's get into today's program, because this is important stuff that I'm talking about, and it's very serious because right now Britain is in a complete and total lockdown. You know, a lot of us allowed the lockdowns to happen in March and April and May because we didn't know much about this virus. And we thought, you know what, just to be on the safe side, let's shut everyone down until we understand this virus now. But I bet most of us never, ever imagined that coming November and into December, we would be back in the same place. And that's because we haven't found new tools and new solutions, and we're not making a proportionate response to the virus. What we see our government doing is cherry picking the data and the science that seems to validate the choice that they want to make with their policy. So they have an intention of where they're going, and they all have their own agendas. Most of them are not based in serving the citizens. They cherry pick the science. They use disproportionate responses to the virus. They're trying to eliminate the virus as opposed to control it. And then we get stuck with damaged economy, damaged mental health, increase in substance abuse, increase in suicides, increase in our younger generation not knowing what to do with their lives, increase in poverty and hunger. And we've got to deal with this right now. So let's find out why we're here right now. The reason we're here is because of this graph you can see on screen. And you'll see this high purple line, which is the study done by Cambridge University that was sanctioned by Public Health England that got us into this mess. And by the way, the recognition this data is wrong could get us out of this mess right now. You know, I welcome the Prime Minister to, come on a live conference later today and say, guess what? We were wrong. The lockdown was based on flawed data. We're going to open everything up right now so we don't continually damage the economy. I would welcome the mayor to make that same admission that he was wrong to crusade for the lockdown of this city that he serves. But of course, neither one wants to do that because that might ruin their chance to get reelected as opposed to serving the citizens. So they're not going to do that. But the data and the graph that I just showed was based on this study by Cambridge, which predicted 4,000 deaths per day in December. And based on those dire predictions, which was nearly 4 times the deaths that we saw back in April, where our peak was about 1,200 in one day, they decided to shut this economy down. And we had a last-minute press conference that was done on a Saturday here in England, where the Prime Minister and his team of crack scientists showed up 2 hours late where they told us they were going to shut this country down. And it was literally days later where our former Prime Minister, Theresa May, stood up in the House of Commons. By the way, when she stood up, our Prime Minister walked out of the room, and she went on to say the data is flawed. This 4,000 death prediction is wrong. That same study was predicting 1,000 deaths per day in real time, and last week those numbers were around 250 per day. So the same study that we are using to lock down an entire country and crush an economy wasn't even working in real time. And this data was later even revised down further to where that 4,000 number in the future was revised down to 1,000. And so the truth is that we clearly saw that this was the wrong data, and yet we locked down this entire country. And the crazy thing is that we even knew the data was flawed, but our entire two-party political system decided to still vote and back the Prime Minister and shut this economy down. And so what happens is this. We are all now shut down, and we are facing massive collateral damage. Let me talk about that. The economy, it's being crushed right now. And as I said before, Lord Stuart Rose, the former chairman of Marks & Spencer, one of the biggest retail companies here in Britain, said, for every day we are locked down, it's going to take 2 to 3 weeks to recover. So do the math. If we're locked down for 30 days or 60 days, this is years and years to recover from this. But it's not just the economy. It's mental health. All of our mental health is being damaged. Suicides are at an all-time record high. And those numbers go even higher for our younger people. We are seeing substance abuse, drugs, smoking, drinking increasing. We are seeing other physical health ailments going up because they can't get access to health care. We're seeing domestic abuse increasing, child abuse increasing. We're seeing a strain on our education system. We're seeing poverty increasing, homelessness increasing, and we're seeing real evidence of people going hungry in this country. All right, so this isn't just about me not being able to go to the gym. This isn't about you not being able to go to a restaurant. This is severe generational damage to our economy based on flawed data. So I just want to set that stage right now. But it goes further, because when you look at the geographic situation in this country, it makes no sense to have an entire lockdown. And this is the start of my point today, that we are making a disproportionate response to this virus, and we need to start making a proportionate response. Let's look at the geography to start this off. Now you'll see this graph that I'm going to show you right now, and these are the 32 boroughs of London. And you'll see from this graph that 21 out of 32 London boroughs are showing a decrease in COVID cases. Let me repeat that. 21 out of 32 London boroughs are showing a decrease in COVID cases. And when you look at some of these numbers, per 100,000, they are showing, on average on London, about 145 cases per 100,000 inhabitants. These numbers are extremely low compared to other major sections of the country where these cases are much, much higher, sometimes double, triple, or quadruple the case numbers that we're seeing here in London. We look at some of these areas in the north, like Oldham. As you can see on this table here, 773 cases per 100,000. Places like Wigan, 593. Places like Bolton, 539, and it goes on and on. Our friends up in Manchester and Leicester, over 400. And yet, what does the government decide to do? Lock down the entire country. And this is one of the key problems here, is we're not seeing a proportionate response to this virus. And that's why I decided to invite on the show this week Dr. Martin Kulldorff. And he is a Harvard Medical School doctor. And the reason I invited him on is because recently he wrote a paper with 2 other top-ranked scholars, one from Stanford, one from Oxford, called the Great Barrington Declaration. You might have heard about it. It was quickly vilified in the press and buried on our technology giant search engines. But he came out and said that we need a proportionate response to the virus, something that he called focused protection. And I want to play for you a short video clip of my conversation with Dr. Martin yesterday. And he talks about the damage being done to the economy. And what we're doing is, by locking down everyone, we are protecting the wrong people, and we are actually hurting the wrong people as well. And here's a short video here from Dr. Martin Kulldorff. There is this massive collateral damage of the lockdown that's just not being quantified, I think, by people and governments. And that means economic damage, mental health damage, physical health damage, substance abuse increases, I think smoking and drinking, suicide, domestic abuse, strain on the education system, poverty, even hunger. All of these are taking massive hits to the lockdown, and yet no one's really talking about them or quantifying them. Is that right?
I think that's right. And we are not quantifying what's occurring now very well. But at the same time, many of these consequences of public health we won't see this year. So COVID-19 is sort of immediate because people are getting sick this year and they're dying this year. But if we look at cancer, for example, if the cancer is not detected this year, they're not going to die this year. But maybe they'll die if they don't have a pap smear. They will die of cervical cancer maybe 3 years from now instead of living another 15 years. So those mortality statistics, we don't have them yet, but that doesn't mean they're not real. So this is something, the consequence of the lockdown is something we're going to have to live with and die with for many years in the future, unfortunately.
And Dr. Kulldorff is going to go deeper into his concept of focus protection, and I'm going to share exactly what he's talking about next. Before we do that, I want to hear from you. Tell me now, wherever you're at, wherever you're watching me right now, leave me a comment, please. If you haven't done it before, leave me one now. Tell me, do you think the full lockdown in Britain is the correct response? Secondly, tell me, is it worth the economic damage, the damage to our mental health, the damage to our younger generation? Do we need better leadership right now? And do we need a new solution? Leave me your comments now. And again, some incredible comments coming in here. I'm watching and reading through them right now. I really appreciate each one of you making comments here, and they're just coming in from everywhere. We've got Jan Usherwood on YouTube saying, thank you for bringing us the truth. You know, that's my job. We've been doing this here at London Real in the entire year of 2020. To much controversy. We've been vilified in the press. We've been vilified by our regulators here in Britain. We've been nearly deplatformed by our tech platforms, but we will bring you the truth no matter what. That's our job. Unfortunately, our politicians don't seem to share that same ethos. Mr. Mayhev on YouTube says, BBC propaganda has gone nuts. Freedom of speech is nearly dead. Yes, it is. And I want to share with you more of that shortly. That's why it's so important what we do here as far as having an independent media platform. Chris Cunningham on YouTube says the media has a frenzy blowing that crap up. Yes, it does. It tries to magnify what's happening to get us to have this knee-jerk response. Ben Harris on YouTube says, of course, the numbers are wrong, and we're going to get into that shortly. Chris on YouTube says, running for mayor of London, he should run for mayor of the world. I appreciate that, Chris. We really want to sort out the problems here, but I appreciate it. It really means a lot to me. King or the King on IG says, future mayor of London. Thank you for the support. I appreciate that. We've got GMO90 says, Brian for Prime Minister. Again, I appreciate that, but we're going to focus on London first. Imran says, Mr. Rose, thanks for all your content. Wishing you success. Ina Einem on IG says, we need more stand-up people in the government, politics, decision makers. Quantum Revolution on IG says, love your work, keep being brave. Jaggeet on IG says, how can the politicians take lockdown decisions without the support of doctors, virologists, and pathologists? Let me repeat that one more time. It's such a great point. How can the politician take lockdown decisions without the support of doctors, virologists, and pathologists? And that's what we're seeing happen here. The politicians cherry pick the science and the data that coincides with their own agenda that doesn't match anything to do with serving the public. It's got to do with their own interests, their own lobbyists, their own vested interests. We need people to listen to the science and listen to the data, and that's why I've had Dr. Kulldorff on, and I want to go into it a bit more. A couple more here. Ian Martin on YouTube says, the first lockdown didn't work either. Fair play, Brian. Hard work and perseverance, brother. It's true. Again, the first lockdown was intended to minimize the strain on our NHS. It was never used as a consequence to slow the spread of the virus. So why are we doing this now? And we want to talk about that more today. And Amanda Robichon on YouTube says, Theresa May was right on that one. We did not need to lock down, and she was totally correct. And Stephen Ballion on Instagram says, Brian, when are the elections? The truth is on the 6th of May next year. The elections are going to happen. We need everyone to vote, and we're going to have more information on that as well. So I appreciate everyone's content. Thank you so much. Chrissy Morrissey on IG says, Brian for mayor. Robert Ryder on IG says, we need a Brian in Sweden, and I appreciate all that support. And I want to go into the next points because it's super important that we get into these topics. I want to talk about this next concept and this next video I want to share with you, and that is this idea of focus protection. And let's talk about this. And again, if you want to know more details about this, you can watch the full episode on freedomplatform.tv, or you can go read the Great Barrington Declaration. But the reason that Dr. Martin Kulldorff spoke is because he said we need a concept of focus protection. And it's because when he started looking at the science, he realized this one simple fact. And he said this to me, quote, "The difference in risk is more than 1,000-fold between the oldest and the youngest groups." And he frankly said to me, he said, Brian, in all of my years as a scientist, whenever we saw a 2 times increase or a 5 times increase in different segments of our case studies, that was alarming. But he said to see something that was in 1,000-fold difference, he said, this told me with a big red alert that we have to have different policies for different demographics. He said, we rarely see this. And that's why he felt compelled to write the Great Barrington Declaration and really make this point. And I want to show a table here to make this point even more. And this is so important. We're going to leave this up for quite a long time. And what you're seeing here is mortality rate estimates due to COVID-19 diagnosis for each age group. And I want to make this clear. If you are between 0 and 4, your risk of death is effectively 0. It's effectively 0%. If you're between 5 and 9, it goes to 0.01%. Again, it's very, very tiny. And it stays that low as you go to 14 years of age. So again, an entire group of 0 to 14-year-olds has a near negligible risk of death to COVID. As you can see, this goes up and is very directly to age. But even as you get up to 60 years old, you're still talking about a 0.6% chance of death. And we see as you get up into the 70s and 80s and 90s, it magnifies to where if you're over 90, you've got a 17% chance of dying from a COVID-19 diagnosis. And again, it's a 1,000-fold risk increase as you get older. And that in itself is why Dr. Kulldorff decided that they needed this concept of focus protection. And again, let me be clear. He said, Brian, the 2 extremes are wrong. He said, doing nothing is wrong. If we go about our daily business, our elderly are going to be dying at rates that's not necessary. He said, Brian, if we lock down the economy entirely, everyone is going to suffer due to economic damage, mental health issues, domestic abuse, drug addiction, everything that comes associated with that. What we need is a hybrid model of focus protection. And he broke it down like this. And again, I'll be playing a video about this shortly. And this is what he said. Care homes. We specifically need to go in and test more in care homes. We need to test the workers. We need to be constantly monitoring the people there and the people in these homes to make sure that they are not at risk of getting the disease. Again, a total lockdown does not do that. And a lack of lockdown does not do that either. And we are still not addressing care homes in this country. Secondly, elderly that are living at home in their own homes need to be protected because any exposure to the virus is going to potentially damage them. So they should be isolated. They should be taken care of. Next, elderly that are sick. This is another issue. If they already have other sicknesses, heart disease, diabetes, everything else, they need to be also shown extra protection. Elderly that are working, anyone in their 60s that are out there working, especially in our service industries, taxi cab drivers, teachers, they should be able to find ways, at least in the next few months, to not be exposed to the public. And finally, elderly in mixed households. Those not necessarily associated with children, because children don't have much risk of passing on the disease, but those that have adults in the house, we need to take special care with them and protect those that are vulnerable. Again, this is an intelligence, science-based solution, and this is something that I would move forward with as your next mayor of London. And then we have everyone else. And all of those people should be encouraged to go back to work, to go back to school, to go back and lead productive lives so they can produce everything else that's necessary to protect those that are vulnerable. And I just want to be specific. This is exactly what the doctor said along with his colleagues at Stanford and Oxford. He said those that are not vulnerable should immediately be allowed to resume life as normal. Very important here. He said, of course, simple hygiene measures, hand washing, staying at home when you're sick should be practiced by everyone, of course, to reduce the herd immunity threshold. Young, low-risk adults should work normally rather than from home. Restaurants and other businesses should open, while arts, music, sports, and other cultural activities should also resume. And of course, schools and universities should be open for in-person teaching. So again, this is basic stuff. It's really important. We've got to have this multi-tiered structure. Focused protection is the only way forward. And again, this is a proportionate response to the virus. The same reason why we are looking at different geographies differently, why we would look at London different than, say, Manchester. This is why we would look at our younger generation differently than our older generation. So I want to play a video for you of Dr. Martin talking more about this delineation. But before we do that, I want to hear from you. Tell me, honestly, do you think a full lockdown in Britain is justified? Do you think locking down everything is the right decision for the damage we're going to face for our economy, for our mental health, for younger generation? And finally, do we need better leadership? And do we need a new solution and a new direction? So answer those questions right now. And I want to play this clip for you of Dr. Martin Kulldorff.
What we're doing now is we are protecting younger college students who are very low risk and young professionals who can work from homes, like lawyers or journalists or scientists like me. Those are the ones we are protected, even though we are very low risk, while in the working class, they are out there driving the cab, working as a janitor, working in the supermarket because they have no choice. So it's the older working class, high risk, who are building up the immunity in the population that will eventually protect all of us, while we are protecting low risk college students and low risk professionals. So it's sort of backwards. And if you look at the data, we can actually see that we have been successful in protecting the professionals, because working class, and especially the inner city working class, have been affected much, much more with much higher mortality. So just like we are able to protect the professional class, which we have done through these lockdowns through the last half year, it is possible also to do a much better job protecting the elderly, the high-risk elderly. Not 100%, that's impossible in a pandemic, but we can do a much, much better job than we have done if we just try and put our minds to it.
Right. No, that's a really good explanation. And you said before, quote, the working class are taking on the burden of generating herd immunity, and they're the ones actually at most risk, especially when there are those older groups. You also went on to say that, you know, those who are not vulnerable should be immediately allowed to resume to life as normal. You said simple hygiene measures like hand washing and staying home when you're sick should be practiced by everybody to reduce the herd immunity threshold. I think you said young, low-risk adults should work normally rather than from home. Restaurants and other businesses should open, while arts, music, sports, and other cultural activities should resume, and schools and universities should be open for in-person teaching. And yet, doctor, we're not seeing any of that, because like you said, we are protecting most of those people that don't need protection.
Yeah, it's backwards.
And so again, what Dr. Kulldorff is saying there is when we're locking down, we are quote unquote protecting an entire swath of our population that doesn't need that protection. And at the same time, what we're doing is we are not aiding those that are most vulnerable. We're not giving them the protection they need. And at the same time, when you shut down everything, everyone gets pulled down with the economic damage, the mental health damage, et cetera. We need this model of focused protection. It can work. It will work. It can get everything back to normal right away. This is the model that doctors like him had planned for the last 10 or 20 years for pandemics. But as the doctor told me, all of that went out the window this year, and the governments and the politicians started using their own playbook for their own agendas, and it's a shame, and we're paying the price. So I want to hear your comments right now. Tell me what you think of all of this. Some great comments coming in, and I've got a next point which is really powerful about the numbers and the statistics and this one is really going to grab you. First of all, love the comments coming in. I really appreciate that. We got Dan on IG says, good luck, love your program. Ron on IG says, Big Daddy Brian for Mayor of London. I appreciate you, Ron. That's great. You're making me laugh here. Jennifer Mamon says, just caught you live, Brian. Love your work. Lockdowns being justified with tests. Correct. I want to get into that shortly. Cato Lee on YouTube says we should not be in lockdown. I agree. Seamus on Instagram said we should reclaim autonomy to obtain our sovereignty. You are so right. And this is something the doctor said yesterday. He says, I think it's going to come from the people because the politicians don't understand this. Chrissy Morris on IG says, where is the guy who predicted 500,000 deaths from coronavirus in the UK? You're referring to Niall Ferguson from the Imperial College London. Again, you are right. 10x the death prediction, which put us into the original lockdown, which is part of the reason we're so calm and relaxed when we're asked to lock down again. Again, the data, the numbers never made sense, and yet that was what our policy was based on. Fleming and IG says, you're doing really good, Brian. Keep going. Thank you very much. OMG and Alpha says, love your work, Brian. Keep going. Beeb on Instagram says, everyone locked down, but the big corporate retails and chain restaurants are killing off small businesses. It's so true. The small business owner is getting crushed, while the big corporations on the S&P 500 and the FTSE 100 are thriving through this. It's not fair, and it's crushing the culture and spirit and entrepreneurialism of this country. It's fascinating. The CEO of Waterstones highlighted in an interview with the BBC yesterday that small, specialist, independent retailers are being unfairly targeted, and it's because of this rush legislation from these rudderless politicians, and I appreciate James Daunt's thoughts on that. What else? We've got Mark Fitzpatrick on YouTube says, I hope Brian is our next mayor. Good luck. Thank you very much. Pat on YouTube said, Brian for Prime Minister. He stands for the truth. I appreciate that. Max on YouTube says, we need a standout solution. Lockdown only worsens the sanity of the masses and the economy. You are so right. And we've got KG on Instagram says, thank you, Brian. It is mental health damage for our society in the UK and the young generation, which is very, very true. And finally, Vicky on Instagram says, yes, new solutions are needed. It's too traumatizing for everyone. And finally, some people are asking when elections are. They are May 6th next year. We're going to need everybody to register to vote, and we're going to have more information coming through next week on exactly how to vote. Let me talk about this third point, and this is such an important point to make, so please listen to me carefully. We are pushed data and metrics every single day, and we are bought into this concept of buying in that these metrics and data are the ones that we should pay attention, and we are being used to be showed that these numbers are how we should affect public policy. And one of the biggest numbers that is bandied about every single day, and one that I asked Dr. Kulldorff about, is the number of positive coronavirus tests that we get shown every single day. Now, yesterday in the UK, we got published a quote-unquote record number of coronavirus cases, and the number was 33,470 people have tested positive for coronavirus in the UK. That was the government's latest daily figure, all right? This is something that was quoted in a BBC article. And yet that same article went on to say these following things. They said, quote, the experts have previously warned against describing the daily figure as a record because there was no widespread testing program during the first wave of the epidemic. So let me say two things here. First of all, we're comparing apples and oranges because the numbers that were tested in March and April, comparing the numbers today, you cannot compare those two numbers, and there's two reasons. First of all, as Dr. Kulldorff explained yesterday, when you have more tests, you have more cases, period. If you are testing 1 million more people, then by definition, you're going to have more cases. Also, he says you can't compare the numbers back then because we weren't testing many people. So of course, you're only going to have 4,000 or 5,000 cases per day, and now we have 35,000 cases per day. And if you look at the graph on the screen that I'm showing you right now, you see a graph with an X and Y axis. Now, I spent some time in engineering school. I spent some time studying science as a kid. And whenever you put a graph like this, you are implying that each data point is similar to the other data points. That's why they're on a graph. So you are implying that the numbers from April and May are the same numbers as the numbers from today. And you're showing a massive spike in COVID cases. And we see these numbers every single day. In America, 1 million new cases. Worldwide, there's 100 million cases. Cases, cases, cases. First of all, you cannot compare the data today with the data back in April, but it goes further than that. And this is something the doctor spoke to me about yesterday. Cases do not mean anything. And so the doctor says in the medical profession, it doesn't make sense to even look at cases. He says it doesn't make sense to test anyone under the age of 18. He said there are so many asymptomatic and mildly symptomatic people, so it's not a smart measure to use for policy or decision making. So we're going out there and testing a whole swath of the population that are mildly symptomatic or asymptomatic. They're testing positive, and all of a sudden we're saying, look at all of these tests. We need to shut down the economy. We need to panic. We need to press the button and reset. We need to all be worried. And we've been conditioned, almost like a Pavlovian dog, that when we see this number, we panic. And our mainstream media and our governments, seriously, they should be held responsible for doing this, because they get us to panic on this number. They have taught us that this is the number that we should watch. That means when it goes up that we are in a worse situation, but it's not. And the doctor went into this further and he said, Brian, there are only 3 numbers that matter: hospitalizations, mortality, and more importantly, excess mortality. And he went in to say this. He said, Brian, if you're in a hospital situation, you know someone is in that hospital because they are suffering from severe symptoms. He said that tells us something about how much the virus is spreading and growing. Next is a mortality metric. If they're not dying, then why is this dangerous for our population? And on top of that, he said you have to look at the excess mortality metric, which is how much more people are dying this year than the previous year or the following year. And he said, Brian, what we're seeing is 2 things. First of all, a lot of people being classified as dying from COVID are people that would have been classified as dying from flu last year, or as being dying from heart disease last year, or had been dying from diabetes last year, because now with the metrics, anybody testing positive for COVID within 28 days are considered a positive COVID test. So first of all, the mortality number is already flawed. And of course, it's going to go up as we go into flu season this winter. That's one number. The next number is the excess mortalities. So again, we are going to see a spike in deaths because the health services aren't available, because the economy is doing bad, because of suicides, because of mental health. And so you have to look at the excess mortality deaths. And this is one of the big numbers that we have to look at. And we can no longer look at the metric of positive coronavirus tests. And it's one of the big mistakes that we see happening here. And by following that number and watching it go from 10,000 to 20,000 to 30,000 to 34,000 new cases yesterday, it's showing us that this is one of the major flaws in what we're doing. And again, this causes us to make a disproportionate response to the virus. And it's by throwing that number out by our politicians, by our mayor of London, by our prime minister. It's by throwing that number out by the mainstream media that instills panic. That means that we decide to comply with these ridiculous, draconian, massive Tier 4 lockdowns, which puts us in the situation we're in today. All because we're looking at a metric that is essentially flawed. We should not even be looking at tests. Tests don't mean anything. And here is a short video of Dr. Martin Kulldorff, again, Harvard medical doctor, an esteemed person who just wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, along with another highly thought of medical doctor here at Oxford in Britain and one in Stanford, saying that we should no longer be having this disproportionate response to the virus. So again, I want to play this video clip for you. This is Dr. Kulldorff talking about the fact that test cases is not a metric to base any decision on. You said in general, it doesn't make sense to look at cases, even though this is the number that's like bandied about every single day on every single major publication, the New York Times, the whatever, 1 million new cases in America, the 100 million globally. I mean, it's every day that number. And that I think you've said that there are 3 numbers to look at, which is hospitalizations, the mortality, and as you were talking about earlier, the excess mortality. Is that true? Should we just ignore looking at cases? Is that number not relevant?
I think in the media, we should ignore it.
Yeah.
The fact that public health officials looks at it, that makes sense, because then you look also at the number of testing and and those things. So public health officials should still look at it, but I don't see the point in the media and media presenting it, because it's really is the mortality and hospitalizations and excess mortality that are critical.
Right. And yet most major global policy is probably being based on the back of that number, or justified on the back of that number.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like,
for example, you can't compare the number of cases now versus in March.
Right.
Because in March, the only ones who were tested were people who were sick, who went to the hospital. So that was many of them would be positive because they actually had COVID, but the total number might not have been so high because you weren't testing asymptomatic. And now if you're testing a lot of asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic people, then the case numbers are going to go up just because of that.
Right. And yet we see these graphs from March to April to May to June, and we think we're comparing apples to apples, but we're not. Like you said, you can't compare the data back then because we're testing so much more now.
Yeah.
They don't compare. Also, we're going into flu season, and a COVID death, I think quite literally, is considered a COVID death if someone tested positive within 28 days of the COVID test. I honestly think it means if you were shot in the head and you tested positive to COVID for 28 days, I think that data point is not taken out. And so we see deaths rising that could easily be flu deaths or other lockdown deaths or any number of deaths. Maybe you can talk about that number too.
Yeah, so that's very true. I mean, many people are dying from COVID, but there are also people dying with COVID.
Right.
And there was a study in a province in Sweden, Östergötland, where they looked at people who were recorded as having died of COVID-19. And about half of them died in the hospital. So most of those were actually true COVID, and the other half died at home or in a nursing home. And they looked at all this in the second group. And of those, only 15% actually had COVID-19 as the primary cause of death. And then 85% either it was completely unrelated, they just died with COVID, or it might have been they died of something else, but COVID might have been a contributing factor. So there's a lot of people who die with COVID, and that depends on how we define mortality, and that's also different in different countries. So therefore, it's also difficult to compare different countries because the definition of a COVID death varies.
Right. And I know early on here in England that they weren't even testing. It was COVID symptoms. And that's how they would qualify deaths April, May, and June.
Yeah.
So yeah, again.
So that's why excess death is sort of the best metric, the most objective metric, because it really see people who died from COVID, but also from other things due to collateral damage, for example. So compare the mortality right now with the average, or let's say the last 5 years, and then adjusting for changes in population numbers.
So 3 major points that the doctor was making there. First of all, the fact that positive coronavirus tests, that metric is useless. It's useless to talk about in the public, the mainstream media, and the governments. Maybe it's important for some health officials to monitor, but it's not a metric of the severity of the virus on a population, period. The second number to talk about, or the second point to make, is you cannot compare even that data from May, April, June to today, because back then only sick people were being tested. Now everyone is being tested, or a lot of people are being tested. So by definition, that data is flawed. And the final very important point that he was making there is what classifies as a COVID death. Now, anybody within a positive test of 28 days is considered a COVID death. Now, a year ago, many of those same people would have not been qualified because we weren't testing for COVID. So anybody a year ago that would have been dying from the same reasons today, flu, heart disease, diabetes, dementia, that happened to have a test and be positive would now be classified as a COVID death. And he even said that when they looked in deeper, only 15% of those were actual COVID deaths and the rest were by some other cause. So really important to understand that the numbers that you're being sold to affect your behavior and to take away your sovereignty as an adult and as a citizen are inherently flawed. And that's what's super frustrating about this entire process. And that's really what we're talking about today. And so I'm going to your comments right now. Again, the last chance to really tell me your thoughts. First of all, do you think right now that we should be locked down in Britain, or do you think the Prime Minister and the Mayor should admit that they were wrong, admit that they co-opted the science, and reopen the economy right now? That's my first question. The second of all, do you think a total lockdown is worth the damage to our economy, to our mental health, to our younger generation? And finally, do you think we need better leadership? And do you think we need a new solution, a new direction, and this concept of focused protection? Again, some amazing comments coming in here. I really appreciate everybody. I'm telling you, all these comments give me so much great energy. It's really amazing. Alex Robinson on Instagram said, freedom of the press is so important. And this is so true. I mean, the reality is that we couldn't talk about a lot of these ideas on certain forums because they are censored. We need to have this open debate for ideas, and that's how we can put the best stuff out there. We've got Hippie on IG saying the lockdown is much more detrimental than the virus because of the damage on health, wellness, the economy, and on our community. Really, really well put there. I appreciate that. Divine says, I love what you stand for. Thank you so much. Cato Lee says, collateral damage is worse than the virus. Cato said, collateral damage is worse than the virus, and we're seeing that today. It's just unquantifiable, and that's something the doctor repeatedly told me yesterday on the episode. He said, Brian, the short term, we can see the COVID deaths, but we can't see the deaths coming from missed cancer diagnoses 3 and 4 years out. We can't see the deaths coming from substance abuse 4 years out. We can't see the deaths coming from mental illness from our younger generation due to suicides years out. And that's one of the big points that we're missing here. Serene C says, not one politician is talking about this. Do you know why? Because most of this world is dominated by the two-party system. And the two parties are there to engage in argument for entertainment's sake. And at the end of it, they give you a choice. Would you like this one or that one? And they go fight again. They're actually not interested in serving you. They're not interested in solving your problems. They're interested in fighting for your entertainment to where you get choice A or B, and then they move on. That's why we need a new direction. We need an independent candidate that's not locked into this two-party system and their vested interests and their lobbyists and their sponsors. We need new ideas, and that's why I am planning to be your next mayor of London. So thank you for these comments. We are great. Brian Seto and Julian Shields on YouTube said, Brian for president. All right, we got 4 more years, but I appreciate that thoughts. And plus, I live in London and I like this country, but thank you for that. Digital Drill says, absolutely good model. He obviously likes the science that's being presented. MailTube2 on YouTube says, go Brian, go. Thank you for being a model for change. I will now head to Petty Power, make my bet. I should have done earlier. Once London is sorted out, you can throw a lifeline to Liverpool. I appreciate you, man. And again, sending tons of love and support to our brothers and sisters in the north who are going through difficult times and who are also being unfairly locked down and who are having to go through policy defined in London. It's not fair. And again, we really appreciate all the hard work being done by Nick Wickcombe up at the People's Gym in Liverpool and fighting for gyms staying open. Gyms are such an important part of our physical health and mental health, and they need to be opened now. What else? Some other comments. I want to make sure I get everyone, so I appreciate the comments here. Raymond Nation on YouTube says, fantastic info. Exactly. This information was buried on Google, our mainstream media, and our search engines. Buried in our social platforms because it didn't fit with the agenda of the social platforms, the mainstream media, and our politicians. That's why it's our job at London Real to put it in front of you. So thank you so much for that. Treffine Artist on YouTube says the ease at which they have imposed these restrictions, not just in Britain and worldwide, is mind-boggling and frankly frightening. Treffine, the reason it's so easy is because we buy into their numbers and we buy into the narrative and we nod our heads. It's like a Pavlovian dog. Oh, the cases are up, well, then we must be in danger. The problem is they have conditioned us like dogs to, bark when they say, what they want, to jump. We say how high, and that's the problem, and we need to get ourselves out of that mindset. Karen Edwards on YouTube says, thank you for speaking out, Brian, and all the London Real Army. I appreciate you, and I appreciate the army behind us. Mike on YouTube says, yes, we need new leadership, and I'm sure Brian can do better than the usual leaders. Good luck, mate. You will need it. I'm sure he's up for the job. Thank you, and I will need it. Let's be clear, folks. We are in for a long fight, This two-party system does not go down without a fight, okay? They have tens to hundreds of millions of pounds behind them. They've got hundreds of years of history, and they're going to come at us with everything. Just wait. The slander campaign is coming. They're going to attack my character. They're going to vilify our platform and our guests and everything that we stand for. But we've got you behind us, the London Real Army, to go out there and tell your friends and family, no, actually, these guys speak the truth. And we're going to be calling on your help very shortly. So I appreciate that. Finally, Rachel Axel says, May cannot come soon enough. London is ready. I appreciate you. And Tigress on Instagram says, someone worth voting for. And I appreciate that. And so, look, I want to conclude with this thought, which is this. Anyone can bring a problem to a situation. Anyone can highlight what's going wrong. But it takes a real dedicated professional to provide a solution. And that's why I decided a couple months ago that I would decide to become your next mayor of London. And that's because I want to offer a solution to the problem. And that's exactly what we want to do here. I want to focus on the economy while also protecting the vulnerable. Again, I want to focus on the economy while also protecting the vulnerable. Most people think it's either or. I disagree. I think you need both. You must have both, which means you must have the economy working and you must have the vulnerable to protect it. And that's what we're going to do. Again, this is about control, not elimination. Everything that Dr. Koldorf talked about is control. We need to find a way to live with the virus, and by using focused protection, we can do that. As your next mayor of London, my plan is to do that. Protect the vulnerable, but get London back to work. And let me tell you exactly how I'm going to do that. First of all, post-lockdown, I'm going to create a 6-month, what I call congestion charge holiday. I want to completely remove the prohibitive taxation that happens right here in London in order to promote more visits to the city and boost the economy. Next, I want to create post-lockdown what I call a business rates holiday, which means remove business rates across the board for all small and medium enterprises inside London. How can you expect a business to come back in one of the worst recessions of all times while simultaneously taxing them? That is a ridiculous socialist idea that doesn't work. We've got to support these businesses, and that's how we do it now. Third, I will stimulate key sectors with expanded financial packages specifically for our hospitality industry. I'm talking about restaurants, cafes, nightclubs, retail, and the hotel sector. Really important. Fourth, I'm going to encourage the return of office workers to the city. Let me repeat that. I am going to encourage office workers to return to the city. Let's find a way to get those age groups under 40 to come back to the city. Let's sit down with the 30 global financial institutions in the city of London, where I used to work, and say, hey, what's it going to take to get your people back? What can we do to get them back here safely? And what can we do to incentivize you to do that? I know that we can come up with a deal, but it starts with a leader being proactive and leading from the front, as opposed to a leader who is literally crusading for a lockdown, who wants to instill fear and panic, and then, of course, next year ask you for another multi-billion-pound bailout. Yep, I'm talking about the Mayor of London, who is 10 billion pounds in the hole from running the Transport for London into the ground, another 10 or 20 billion pounds in the hole for mistakes made with subsidized housing, and of course now he's going to probably be asking for another 5 billion pounds come next year because he has crusaded for a lockdown that's crushing our economy. That's not what I would do. Let's get back to work. Next, I would implement science-based protocols for retail establishments to comply with COVID, but also responsibly get back to work. Next, I want to safely open up museums, theaters, concert areas, and stadiums. I know we can do it. I want to allow outdoor seating for the use of streets for all of our retail and hospitality businesses here in London. It sounds simple. We could do it right now, and we could open up these businesses and be safe for COVID. I want to get our children back to school, which is going to promote all the businesses around that, and it's going to support those depending businesses. On top of that, I want to put science first and talk about what I just talked about, proportional response to the virus. I want to put our health first. I want to be proactive with our health. I want to get people in gyms. Let's start eating more responsibly. Let's really talk seriously about smoking cessation, reducing our drinking, and how we look at drugs in this country. Let's look about mindset. Let's look about getting better sleep habits. Next, I want to put education first and really get our kids back to school. Still a lot of schools that are not at capacity because of this virus. And finally, I want to put family first. By promoting the family structure, we're going to reduce crime. We're going to have massive benefits to the economy, and we're going to really save a lot of our housing issues and some of our other social supports. So those are my plans as your next mayor of London. To be honest, no one is talking about the policies that I'm articulating here, which is strange because the people that are trying to run for mayor, they've been doing this for 20 years. So they're supposed to be the ones with the great ideas, but we have the best articulated policies. Again, these are all summarized on my Transform London 2021 plan of attack. It's all on our website, brianformayor.london. Go there. Please sign up for our list. You can donate to our campaign, and we're soon going to have ways that you can help volunteer, because let's be honest, folks, we are going to need every single one of your help to win this race. The two parties, they are going to dig in here. They're going to start coming after us. They're going to spend big. They're going to try to attack us. We're going to need every single member of the London Real Army in the streets, sharing our videos, giving us comments and likes, speaking with your friends and family, hopefully out there passing out flyers, talking to people, like I said, sharing the videos and talking about how we all together can move into City Hall and make the changes we need. I'm telling you, this is desperate times. They require desperate measures, and enough of this current crop of politicians. They've shown time and time again that they cannot handle this situation. They are making disproportionate decisions and disproportionate responses to this virus. There's a total lack of science-based decision-making. And let's just talk about basic leadership. Again, they do not show credibility in their decisions. They do not show that they are making solutions, and they're not trying to get London back to work or get this country back to work. So let's do that. Let's move proactively in the future. Let's be optimistic, and I know we can find solutions. Again, I think we can make London a world-class city once again, and we're looking forward to those solutions. So thank you so much. I appreciate all of you for being here today. And again, if this video resonated with you, please share this with all of your friends and followers. Leave me your comments below. I'd love to see all of your comments out there. And again, we're going to need your support. We're going to need every single member to help us and really support us in this final race. Again, I feel like we're all going to be moving into City Hall together. We're going to need all of your help and all of your sacrifice, but I think we could be an example for the world. I think London could show the world what it looks like when you have a focused response to this virus, when you have focused protection. We could show the world how we could protect our elderly, protect those in our care homes, protect those that are already suffering from disease, but at the same time, get our younger generation back to work. If we could do that, we could kickstart our economy. We could save our mental health issues. We could prevent suicide, prevent drug addiction, prevent domestic abuse. We could really be a model for the world, and by doing that, I think we can help the world as well. So I'm super excited to be your next mayor of London. Please keep talking about us. There's only one reason that the sports, the betting agencies are making us soon to be number one. It's because you're talking about it, you're telling people about it, you're sharing the videos. So please keep doing that. Please keep supporting us. And again, it's going to be my honor to serve you as your next mayor of London. We are super excited for the challenge, and we are confident that we can find solutions to these problems. Again, I'm going to use the science. I'm going to make an intelligent, proportionate response, and we're going to get everyone back to work, and we're going to get through this crisis. Thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to doing more of these videos to continue to put these issues out there and to serve you as your next mayor of London. Thank you.
At London Real, we believe that individual transformation can change the world. Join us and start your journey today.